Welcome to Wednesday Walks Together. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. I'd like to focus a little today on values. I think it's the American election that has got me thinking a little about how my own personal values integrate with the values of the society that I'm part of. And of course, in today's Western world, it's the Western world, not just my own little community. And of course, my faith values link into that. I spoke last Friday about 1 Corinthians 13. And just at the end of that chapter, Paul speaks about faith, hope, and love, and says that the greatest of these is love. Now, I'm not sure that necessarily we would always put them in that order. For Paul at that particular point, love really was the greatest thing that the Corinthian community needed. I think perhaps at this point in our lives, hope is the greatest of these. As we struggle ongoingly with the pandemic, as we consider some of the just ongoing tragic elements of our social interactions and where our world finds itself. And there may be other times, and maybe even now, maybe it's faith and hope that need to link together. Faith also has a point where it becomes quite critical. So all three are important, and I think we need to recognize that. And in a sense, those three give us a value base. As Christians, we draw on the nature of God. And as Paul is saying here, part of God's nature is that God is a God of faith, God is a God of hope, God is a God of love. And we draw on all of that. There are other aspects to that, caring, the gift of peace, etc. We can extend that list from a faith perspective quite substantially. So we hold those as people of faith. We hold our faith values. We hold the values that we've grown up with, and we hold the values of the society we live in. And a lot of the time, we do that subconsciously. And we need to, I think, become, or I'm certainly feeling the need to become more consciously aware of what values I'm interacting with and how my responses, my attitudes, my reactions, my life reflects the values that are there. We live in a very consumerist society, as I was saying on Friday. To expect a young couple to commit to a long-term relationship until death us do part in a world where we just throw things away. There's a major conflict in value in that context. But then in thinking more broadly, and politics and economics and everything else is part of our lives, there are greater kind of social philosophies, political philosophies that drive the societies we're part of. And without thinking about it, we imbibe a lot of that. And it impacts upon the way we think and the way we live. I just had a brief look at a definition through Google in terms of liberalism, which has been something that's driven society over a long time. And essentially, liberalism could be described as a political and social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. And certainly, I think I was brought up on a lot of that. But what has struck me around the American elections, but also just some of the comments around South Africa and where we're going with the IMF and various other things, is the whole philosophy of or political approach of neoliberalism, which again, in terms of a Google definition, is a political approach that favors free market capitalism, deregulation, and the reduction in government spending. Now, just reading through both those definitions, there's certain values there that I think we can all hold on to. Things like, in liberalism, things like individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, free enterprise. It's something that we've committed our lives to, and it's been part of the social experiment, as it were, of the new South Africa. But mixed in with that is the neoliberal perspective. And interestingly, one very interesting article I read the other day spoke about the way that there is within the neoliberal perspective, there's actually a conflict between equality and sufficiency. So liberalism in many ways promotes equality. And again, how do we all ever become equal? We know the disparities, but that is a foundational value I think is really important, certainly for me. Sufficiency is also important, and that one should have enough. But it intrigued me that neoliberalism actually undermines equality in order to ensure sufficiency. And when we read about things in the definition of neoliberalism, like the reduction in government spending, well, I think we'd all agree that the public wage bill needs to drop. But yet we need to explore more deeply what these values actually ask of us and of our society. But I think even more importantly, what I'm trying to get to today is while all of that is there, it really comes down to how am I seeing the world? What pair of spectacles am I wearing? I see the world without spectacles, it's a little blurred out there. I put them on and it's a little clearer. But my spectacles do certain things, and I'm very aware it just changes the perspective of what's out there. They're multifocal. So I've also realized, and I find this particularly cycling, that I get into a certain angle and they twist slightly. I can see double down the road. There's two white lines down the middle. And that's not because it's two white lines with dots in between. It's one line that's become two. And I haven't changed my spectacles, but I'm seeing a little differently because something is just knocking them out of the correct space, and so I see differently. And whether I should be seeing two lines or not, well, that's open for discussion. But the reality is that if I wear them in one way and if I knock them slightly in another way, one line can become two, two can become one again. And just a wonderful reminder that as things happen, so this process is happening largely subconsciously for us. And the challenge for me is how does that conflict or align with the values of my faith? And how do I apply my faith to the world in which I live? There was a number of interviews I've watched around Trump supporters where they're asked various questions, and quite clearly there's a complete disconnect between their support for Trump and actually what they believe to be valuable. And some of it's quite laughable, but it's breaking too. And it's not just true of Trump and his supporters. It's probably true across the political spectrum. It's just very visible with Trump supporters at the moment. It's looking in the mirror, of course, and having the courage to recognize that there is this dissonance between what I say I believe and what I support within the social, economic, political environment in which I live. And so I would encourage you to become more conscious and recognize some of the unconscious biases that drive your life, and for me to recognize those that drive mine. And to allow the Spirit of God to be part of that conversation and part of that direction, that we may become more whole as individuals, that we may become more whole as a society, and that we may, as people of faith, really build what is good into the fabric of the social environment that we live in.